Well, continuing now with Dave Barry's Class Clown, the memoirs of a professional wise ass. When last we met, we were in the midst of the shenanigans of Dave Barry and his buddy Lanny Watts in high school, as he put it in this caption, in the caption to this picture, a pair of wise asses clearly up to no good. When Lanny and I were seniors, there was a big school dance, and we volunteered to be on the publicity committee. Actually, we were the entire committee. Needless to say, we did not volunteer out of a sincere interest in publicizing the dance. We volunteered because we had come up with what we considered to be a brilliant plan for incorporating an obscene reference into the dance posters. The key to this plan was the fact that we seniors were the class of 1965. So we made a bunch of posters that said, "When you're in the college class of 69, you'll still remember this dance." The 69 was much bigger than everything else. Basically, each poster was a giant 69 with some words around it. As I say, Lanny and I thought this was brilliant. The thing was, all posters had to be approved by the school authorities. So one morning before school, Lanny and I found Principal McCreary. We figured he was our best shot in the hall outside his office and showed him our posters. He read them, and in his defense, he was something like 285 years old, said they were okay. He got out his pen and was about to initial the posters to indicate his approval when up walked Mr. Sabella. Uh-oh. Mr. Sabella, who was much more street savvy than Mr. McCreary, took one look at the posters and declared that they were unacceptable. Mr. McCreary asked why, and Mr. Sabella, glaring at Lanny and me, said, "Because they have obscene implications." Mr. McCreary, red-faced and befuddled, said, "Oh." Mr. Sabella ordered Lanny and me to stuff our posters into a trash can, and that was the end of our brilliant scheme. Incredibly, we did not get detention for that incident. I think Mr. Sabella viewed what we did as hijinks as opposed to a serious rule violation. Scary as he could be, he was a reasonable man. He could even be funny, as I learned when I had him as a teacher. In addition to being assistant principal, he taught American history, and it was one of the best classes I had in high school. He was an entertaining speaker, and he encouraged freewheeling discussion. He didn't mind if you argued with him. In fact, he liked it. In the end, Mr. Sabella turned out to be one of the Pleasantville people I remember most fondly, which is amusing considering how many times he basically lifted me off the floor by my neck. Another teacher I remember fondly is Regina Adams, who taught English composition. We did a lot of essays in her class, and at some point I started trying to make mine funny, and she encouraged me. I wrote one essay, something about being excited for the school year to end, that she liked so much she wanted me to read it to the class. I definitely did not want to do that, as my carefully cultivated image was wise ass, not teacher's pet. Mrs. Adams asked if she could read the essay to the class, keeping the author anonymous. I was okay with that. So Mrs. Adams read my essay, and my classmates laughed in the right places. It felt good hearing people laugh at my words. It still does. So thanks, Mrs. Adams. There's one other high school teacher I want to acknowledge, but he doesn't fit into the narrative, so I'll mention him here in a footnote. Jerry Solon, who taught advanced math. He was so good at it that for a brief period, maybe 35 minutes, but long enough to pass the exam, I sort of understood calculus. In my senior year, I wrote my first published humor piece, which appeared in the school newspaper, The Green Lantern. Pleasantville's colors were green and white. My friend Tom Parker was co-editor, not because he was interested in journalism, but because he wanted to be able to write editor of school newspaper on his application to Yale. The other co-editor was Philomene I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Philomene. There's an accent on the first E, so I'm not sure. Philomene? I don't know. Durson, who, following the ancient custom of women in organizations with men, did the actual work. But as I say, Tom was my friend, and thus the Green Lantern published a story I wrote about an unofficial Pleasantville tradition, the senior boys' load ball game. This was a tackle football game played on a muddy field by senior boys who were simultaneously consuming a large quantity of beer. Nobody kept score, and there were no rules. There could be 40 or 50 players involved at any given moment, and sometimes more than one football. It was chaotic and violent and very stupid. It was a lot of fun. Needless to say, the load ball game was not a school-sanctioned event. Under no circumstances would... I'll back up here. I missed a footnote here. His friend Tom, the co-editor, who wanted to write editor of school newspaper on his application to Yale, Dave notes it worked. He was accepted. Needless to say, the load ball game was not a school-sanctioned event. Under no circumstances would the school newspaper cover it, which was, of course, why I wanted to get it into the school newspaper. I did this by writing about it as if it were a legitimate sporting event, with subtle references to, but no actual mention of, beer. I don't have the original column, and the only joke I recall is something about players being sidelined with cut thumbs. Explanation for young people. Back then, we opened beer and soda cans by pulling off pop tabs, which had sharp edges, thus the cut thumbs. I don't remember whether my fellow students thought my story was funny, but I do remember enjoying seeing it in print. As I said, I wound up loving high school, which for me was mostly a fun and, the occasional zit notwithstanding, stress-free time. My world was small and comfortable. I was vaguely aware that there was a larger world out beyond Armonk and Pleasantville, but it didn't affect me much. Although that was changing, the comfortable blandness of the 50s had faded, and my little cocoon was about to be punctured by the 60s, in all its manifestations, some good, some bad, some weird. My first true 60s experience was decidedly good. The August 28, 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. I was there. I rode down on a bus from New York City with a group of staff members from Camp Sharperoon. Sharperoon was one of the summer camps for inner-city kids. The other one was Camp Minisink, operated by my dad's organization, the New York City Mission Society. Growing up, we Berry kids were campers at both of these camps, which was a mind-expanding experience for us, going from Armonk, where everybody was white, to environments where we were a racial minority. I remember a couple of summers at Camp Minisink when I believe my sister Kate and I were the only white campers. Those were good summers. I made friends, had fun, learned a lot of new slang, and never felt, even for a moment, less than completely accepted by the other kids. I seriously doubt that a black kid would have been accepted the same way in Armonk back then. Anyway, by 1963, I was too old to be a camper, so I worked that summer on the maintenance crew at Camp Sharperoon. At the end of the summer, the City Mission Society organized a trip for staff, mostly college students, who wanted to attend the March on Washington. The night before the march, we went to a big candlelight rally in Harlem where we all held hands, black and white together, and sang We Shall Overcome, which we sincerely believed we would. Early the next day, we piled into buses and rode to D.C., where we joined the largest crowd I'd ever been part of, miles and miles of people, hundreds of thousands of us, hot and happy and hopeful. We gathered around the reflecting pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial to listen to the speeches. I was maybe 100 yards from the speaker's platform. My parents were closer. Dad was a guest of his friend, Whitney Young, Jr., head of the Urban League, who was one of the speakers that day. We were excited to hear Dr. King speak. He was the star. But I don't think most of us realized, I certainly didn't, how famous that speech would become. I mainly remember the feeling of being part of something really big, and of being absolutely certain that I was on the good side. This is a feeling I would have less and less often as the years went by and the 60s receded and I grew old. A little less than 3 months after the euphoria of the March on Washington came the gut punch of Dallas. I was at Pleasantville High in Spanish class. The teacher, Miss Nauman, arrived late, crying, and told us that President Kennedy had been shot. We all sat there stunned. There was obviously going to be no Spanish that day. A few minutes later, another teacher came in to tell us that the TV news people were saying the president was dead. School ended early. Everything was canceled. As we waited for our buses, I was in the milling crowd of students across from the high school on what was known as the corner, where students often gathered to smoke and joke around and generally carry on as teenagers do when they form into clots. But we were a subdued group that day. It was the first time I remember experiencing an uneasy feeling that would become familiar in the 60s, the feeling that huge things were happening, things that nobody had seen coming, things that nobody fully understood. Until Dallas, it felt, at least to me, as though somebody important, some older person wearing a suit, somebody with all the requisite information was in control. After Dallas, more and more it felt as though nobody was in control. That was a big part of the vibe of the 60s. I'll stop here for a moment to tell my own experience. I was in Common Learnings class, they called it, at Northgate Junior High School in North Kansas City School District, Missouri. And I don't remember whether the announcement came over the loudspeaker. You know, every room had a loudspeaker where the principal could, or someone from the office could speak to us. I don't remember whether it came over the loudspeaker or whether Mrs. Elliott, Flossie Elliott, was our Common Learnings teacher. It's possible that she came in and told us. It was right after lunch, I guess, that we got the news when we got back from lunch. I don't remember anything really about the rest of that day at school. I think classes went on. I don't remember the teachers saying, let's talk about what's happened today. I don't remember anything like that. He says there was no more Spanish that day. As far as I can remember, the class went on, but I really don't remember. I do remember getting home and turning on the TV and watching the coverage the rest of the weekend. I particularly remember that Friday evening, watching President Johnson, watching the plane carrying President Kennedy's body, Air Force One, arrive at the, I think it's Edwards Air Force Base, I believe, outside of Washington. I may be wrong about that. That may be the one in California. I can't remember now. But anyway, I remember watching the plane arrive and take the casket out back and put it into the hearse. Mrs. Kennedy, with her blood-soaked, still in her blood-soaked suit, not pantsuit, the suit, very nice pink outfit, bloodstained, looking like she didn't know which way was up. Trying one door and it didn't work, and she tried another door, and Bobby Kennedy there to help her get in the car. She wanted to be with the president's body. Then seeing President Johnson and Mrs. Johnson go to the microphones and President Johnson give his very heartfelt, makes me choke up even now that I think about it, his very heartfelt words to the nation on President Kennedy's death, and his very heartfelt request for prayer and God's help in the days to come. I remember watching the coverage the rest of the weekend, on through the funeral on Monday. I remember that Sunday, after we got home. I don't think we saw this live. I think it happened while we were at church, maybe. Maybe we saw a replay after we got home of the shooting of Oswald, Ruby's shooting of Oswald, in the Dallas Police Department garage. So that weekend is still, for anybody of my generation, it's still seared into our memories. So anyway, that's just a little personal aside. As you see, Dave Berry and I are the same generation. He was born just a few years before I was, and I can relate to so much of what he writes about here. So now he goes on to say another event that happened in the fall of 1963, which I in no way mean to compare with the Kennedy assassination, although it was huge for me, was that the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles issued me a driver's license. The day it arrived, I got into my mom's car and put at least 100 miles on it.